Get your things and get out." The words weren't shouted. They were worse. They were calm, measured, like a final judgment delivered by someone who had practiced them in the mirror. My son, Mark, stood in the doorway of the living room, his form a dark silhouette against the warm light behind him. He held a black plastic trash bag in one hand. It hung limp and empty, a void waiting to be filled. "Now," he added, his voice as flat and cold as the November rain that was hammering against the window panes, each drop a tiny fist beating on the glass. I stood frozen in the hallway. The wool of my old gray sweater suddenly felt abrasive against my skin. Underneath it, pressed against my stomach, was my tablet. Its hard, cool edges were a solid reality in a world that had just dissolved into a nightmare. Just 10 minutes ago, I was up in my small attic room, the one with the drafty window and the floorboards that always complained. The glow of that tablet's screen had been a sacred, silent miracle, a string of numbers, a confirmation message that seemed to hum with electricity. "Congratulations. You are a Powerball jackpot winner. $10 million. A number so large it felt like a fiction, a dream you wake up from. Now this." The dream had been replaced by a different kind of unreality. "Chloe and I are done," Mark said, taking a step forward. The trash bag rustled, a dry, dead sound. "We can't do this anymore. You're a burden." The word hung in the air between us. Burden. It landed with a physical weight, settling in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I looked past him, into the living room. Chloe was there, standing by the fireplace, her arms crossed. She wasn't looking at me. She was examining her manicure, a portrait of studied indifference. She had cooked this. She had served this meal to him, and he was delivering it. My gaze fell on the family photos arranged on the mantel behind her. There was one of Mark and Chloe on their wedding day, all smiles and promises. There was one of them with Lily, my granddaughter, at Disneyland, their faces bright with manufactured joy. There was no picture of me. I had been cropped out of their life long before this moment. "Mark," I managed to say. My voice was a dry whisper, a sound I didn't recognize. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Mom. It's exhausting," he sighed, the sound full of a weariness that was somehow more insulting than anger. "The complaints, the appointments, the smell." He gestured vaguely around the hallway. "Chloe can't live like this. I can't live like this. It's a constant drain, financially, emotionally." The tablet felt hot now, searing through the fabric of my sweater. $10 million. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid at the back of my throat. I had spent my life savings, every last penny from the sale of the house I shared with my late husband, Robert, to give them the down payment for this very home, $400,000, given with the promise of a forever home for all of us. My forever had turned out to be a cramped attic and the role of an unpaid, invisible servant. He took another step and pushed the trash bag towards me. "Your things. From the attic. Let's go." I didn't move. My feet were rooted to the floorboards. I was 68 years old. My husband was gone. My home was gone. And now my son was holding a garbage bag for what was left of my life. "Please," I whispered. And the sound was so pathetic, it shamed me. "It's raining. Where would I go?" Chloe finally looked up from her nails. Her eyes, cold and blue, met mine for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something, annoyance, triumph, passed over her face before it was gone. "That's not our problem to solve, Ava," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "We've given you a home for 5 years. We've done our part. It's time for you to be responsible for yourself." Responsible for myself. After I'd cooked every meal, washed every dish, mended every torn seam, and babysat my granddaughter every single day so Chloe could build her online brand. I was the cog that made their perfect machine run, and now that I was worn, I was being discarded. Mark's patience snapped. He strode past me and started up the narrow, steep stairs to the attic. "If you won't do it, I will." I heard his heavy footsteps above me, a drawer being yanked open, the sound of things being swept into a pile. I imagined my few possessions, The worn paperbacks I'd reread 100 times, the knitting needles Robert had bought me for our last anniversary, the small framed photo of him that sat on my nightstand. All of it, being scraped together like trash. I clutched the tablet tighter. The numbers from the lottery website burned behind my eyelids. 08, 14, 26, 33, 47. Powerball 19. They were a mantra, a prayer, a curse. The key to a universe they couldn't even imagine, and here I was, being evicted from a world I had paid for. Mark came back down the stairs, the black bag now bulging awkwardly. It wasn't full. There wasn't enough of my life to fill it. He thrust it at me. Here, now get your coat. I looked at his face. My son's face. The face I had once cradled in my hands. The face I had kissed goodnight 1,000 times. There was no recognition there. No love. Just a grim, determined hardness. He was a stranger wearing my son's skin. He was performing a necessary, unpleasant task, like taking out the garbage. I was the garbage. Numbly, I walked to the small coat closet by the door. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely work the zipper on my thin, worn coat. It wasn't nearly warm enough for a night like this. I slipped my feet into my old walking shoes, the ones with the soles worn smooth. Chloe glided over to the door, her phone in her hand. She was probably already composing a post about their quiet, peaceful evening, now that the negative energy was gone. She opened the front door. A blast of wind and rain swept into the hallway, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and dying leaves. It felt like the world was weeping. The warmth of the house at my back was a paradise I was being exiled from. Mark put a hand on my back. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a push. Firm. Final. Go on, he said, his voice low. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I stumbled forward, over the threshold, and out onto the small, unsheltered porch. The rain was instant, drenching my hair, my face, my coat. It was shockingly cold, stealing the air from my lungs. I clutched the trash bag in one hand and hugged the tablet to my chest with the other. I turned to look back one last time. Mark and Chloe stood there, framed in the doorway, bathed in the golden light of the home I had bought. They looked like a perfect couple from a catalog. Strong, successful, unburdened. The locks will be changed in the morning, Chloe said, a final practical nail in the coffin of my life. Then Mark closed the door. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was louder than the rain, louder than the wind, louder than the frantic, silent screaming in my own head. I was alone. Standing in a torrential downpour, the streetlights of Brookline blurring into watery halos through the sheets of rain. The house behind me was a fortress of warmth and light, utterly impenetrable. In my hand, a garbage bag holding the scraps of my past. And pressed against my heart, a secret worth $10 million. A key to a future I couldn't comprehend, held by a woman who had just been told she was worthless. The cold was already seeping into my bones, but the tablet under my sweater felt like it was on fire. My name is Ava. I am 68 years old, and for most of those years I was a librarian. More importantly, for 40 of those years, I was Robert's wife. After he passed, I became something else entirely. A widow, yes. But more than that, I became a memory waiting to be misplaced. Robert and I had a life built on the quiet rustle of turning pages and the scent of old paper and fresh coffee. Our home was a small, unassuming 2-bedroom, but its walls were lined with books, and every book was a story, a world we had visited together. Our life was not grand, but it was sturdy, built of shared laughter and the comfortable silence that only comes from knowing another soul completely. When he died, the silence in that house became a roar. The walls, once so comforting, felt like they were closing in. So when my son Mark and his wife Chloe approached me with their proposition, it felt like a lifeline. They had found their dream house in Brookline, a sprawling, modern structure with a yard for my granddaughter, Lily, to play in. It was everything our little house wasn't. Spacious, new, filled with light. But it was expensive. They needed a significant down payment, a sum that felt astronomical to me. I remember the day we discussed it. We were in my kitchen. the one where Robert and I had danced to old records while waiting for the kettle to boil. Chloe held my hand, her grip earnest. "Think of it, Ava," she'd said, her voice smooth as honey. "It would be a forever home. For all of us. No more rattling around in this big old place by yourself. You'd have your own space, of course, a little suite just for you. We'd be a family, all under one roof." Lily needs her grandma. Mark, my son, my only child, had put his arm around me. "It's the smart move, Mom. You sell this place, pool the money with us. We take care of you. You take care of us. It's perfect." I looked at his face, searching for the boy I had raised, the one who used to fall asleep with his head in my lap while I read him stories. And I saw him, or I thought I did. I saw a man trying to build a future for his family. And I, his mother, had the means to help him lay the foundation. The real estate market was kind to me. My modest home, filled with 4 decades of love and memories, sold for a little over $400,000. Every single cent of it went to them. I signed the check at the bank, my hand trembling slightly, not from regret, but from the magnitude of the gesture. It was the entirety of my life with Robert, liquidated into a single piece of paper. It was my past, my present, and my security, all offered up on the altar of my son's future. I didn't see it as a sacrifice. I saw it as a continuation, a replanting of family roots in newer, richer soil. The Brookline house was as grand as they'd described, but from the moment I stepped inside, I felt like a visitor. My old, comfortable furniture, the pieces Robert and I had picked out together, looked small and out of place against the vast, gray walls and minimalist decor. Most of it was discreetly moved to the basement. My suite was the attic. They called it a loft-style space. It was a single long room with a slanted ceiling and a small porthole window that looked out onto the neighbor's shingles. There was no closet, just a metal rack in the corner. There was no insulation to speak of, and certainly no dedicated heating vent. The first winter, I learned to sleep in layers, my breath pluming in the air like a ghost's. The cold was a constant companion, a physical manifestation of the chill that was beginning to settle in my heart. My promise of a forever home had become a life of silent, unpaid service. I was the first one up, my joints aching from the cold floorboards. I would tiptoe down the 2 flights of stairs to the cavernous kitchen to make coffee, just the way Mark liked it, and to pack a lunch for Lily. I did the laundry, the mountain of it, that a busy family generates. I scrubbed the floors, dusted the surfaces, and tended to the garden. I cooked dinners that were often eaten in shifts, Mark and Chloe staring at their phones, occasionally murmuring a distracted, "Thanks, Mom," without looking up. I became a phantom in their lives. My presence was functional. I was the engine that kept the house running, humming quietly in the background, but I was rarely seen or truly acknowledged. I was a pair of hands for the chores, a warm body to watch Lily when they went out for their date nights. I was a piece of antique furniture, as they'd once joked to their friends when I was in the room. Useful, a bit old-fashioned, but ultimately just part of the background. They stopped asking for my opinion, then they stopped asking about my day. Soon, they just stopped speaking to me at all, unless it was to ask where the clean towels were or to tell me they'd be late for the dinner I was already in the middle of cooking. The deepest ache came from my granddaughter, Lily. I loved her with a ferocity that surprised me. She was a link to Robert, a continuation of our line. In her, I saw a spark of the future I had invested in. But as she got older, she learned from her parents. She learned that Grandma was a fixture, not a person. She would come to me for a cookie or help with her homework, but the easy, cuddly affection of her younger years was replaced by a polite distance. She was learning that I was invisible. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of that cold attic and the endless, thankless tasks that filled my days. Loneliness was no longer an emotion. It was the climate I lived in. I had given away my past for a future where I had no place. And in that suffocating silence, I began a small, secret act of rebellion. It started with my knitting. It was a habit from my years with Robert. He loved the woolen scarves I'd make. After he was gone, I kept doing it, the rhythmic click of the needles, a soothing mantra against the grief. I started selling them on an Etsy shop I'd set up years ago. A simple gray scarf, a soft blue one. They didn't sell for much, maybe $15 or $20 after shipping. It was a pittance, but it was mine. It was money that Mark and Chloe didn't know about. It was the only thing in my life that belonged solely to me. Once a week, usually on a Tuesday morning when the house was empty, I would take my small earnings, folded into a crisp bill, and walk to the corner store. The walk itself felt like a transgression. I didn't buy myself a nice coffee or a pastry. I bought a single Powerball ticket. This became my ritual. It wasn't about the fantasy of yachts and mansions. I had no desire for extravagance. It was about something far more fundamental. The lottery ticket was a secret. In a life where my every move was implicitly monitored, where my existence was entirely circumscribed by the needs of others, that little slip of paper in my coat pocket was a world they couldn't see, a thought they couldn't guess. It was a weekly purchase of possibility. Robert had always had a saying. Whenever I'd worry about finances or the future, he'd pat my hand, smile his steady smile, and say, "Hope is a strategy, Ava." For him, it meant active planning, working towards a goal. For me, in that attic, it took on a different meaning. Hope was no longer about a grand strategy. It was about survival. My single lottery ticket was a strategy for surviving the week. It was the knowledge that for a few days, there was a 1 in a million chance that my world could crack open and let the light in. The hope wasn't in the winning. It was in the buying. It was in the secret. I never truly, not for a single moment, believed I would win. The odds were absurd, a fool's game. It was just a quiet ritual, a way to whisper to myself that I was still here, that a part of me still existed beyond being Mark's mother. I would tuck the ticket into the back of an old copy of Moby Dick that I'd managed to keep, one of the few books that had made the journey to the attic with me. Then, one evening, it happened. It was a Wednesday. Mark and Chloe were out. Lily was at a sleepover. The house was blissfully, completely silent. I had made myself a simple dinner of toast and tea and had taken it up to my room. The house was cold, as usual. I was huddled under my thickest quilt, the winning numbers glowing on my old laptop screen. I pulled the ticket from its hiding place inside the book. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from a sudden electric jolt of adrenaline. I checked the first number. It matched. A coincidence. I checked the second. It matched too. My breath caught in my throat. The third. A match. The fourth. A match. The fifth. It couldn't be. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I looked at the final number, the red Powerball. I looked at the screen, then back at my ticket. My vision blurred. I wiped my eyes and looked again. It matched. All of them. $10 million. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat there in the profound, freezing silence of my attic room, the winning ticket clutched in my hand. The world outside my little porthole window hadn't changed. The chill still seeped through the floor. I was still Ava, the ghost of Brookline, the unpaid maid, the forgotten mother. But in my hand, I held thunder and lightning. I held a secret so monumental it could level the entire, carefully constructed world downstairs. I was still invisible, but I was no longer powerless. And in that moment, sitting alone in the dark, I understood what Robert really meant. Hope wasn't just a strategy. It was a weapon, and I had just learned how to use it. The evenings were the hardest. Dinner was a ritual of erasure. The heavy oak table, the one Robert and I had picked out decades ago, was a stage for my daily disappearing act. Mark and Chloe would sit opposite each other, their faces bathed in the cold blue light of their phones. My chair was different from theirs. Theirs were a matching set of 6, upholstered in a clean, modern gray fabric. Mine was a leftover wooden kitchen chair, hard and unyielding, a silent testament to my status as an add-on, an afterthought. I'd sit, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the symphony of their existence, the tap, tap, tap of their fingers on glass screens, the occasional shared snort of laughter at a meme I couldn't see, a world away. "Oh my God, look at this one," Chloe would murmur, angling her phone toward Mark. He'd grunt an acknowledgement, his own thumb never ceasing its endless scroll. They spoke a language of shared links and private jokes, a digital shorthand that left no room for me. My plate was always different, too. The scent of their sizzling steak, seasoned with garlic and rosemary, would fill the dining room, a rich, savory cloud that made my mouth water. On my plate would be a pale, boiled chicken breast and a mound of limp, unseasoned vegetables. "We have to watch your cholesterol, Mom," Mark would say without looking up from his screen, the words delivered with the same sterile detachment as a medical warning. It was framed as care, but it felt like a punishment. It was food for the infirm, the burdensome. I ate it with the plastic fork and knife they'd given me after I'd once, with hands trembling from the attic's chill, dropped one of their heavy silver forks. The clatter had made Chloe jump. "Goodness, Mom, you'll give me a heart attack," she'd said, half laughing. The next day, a set of brightly colored plastic cutlery appeared by my plate. "Safer," Mark had declared. "Safer for their peace of mind. Safer for their floors." Lily, my granddaughter, would sometimes look at me from across the table. Her eyes, so much like her grandfather's, would hold a flicker of something, pity, maybe, or guilt. But then Chloe would say, "Lily, honey, eat your greens. Don't play with your food." And the moment would be gone. Lily's eyes would drop back to her plate, her small shoulders slumping under the weight of her mother's casual command. She was learning the family's most important lesson. Her grandmother was to be seen through, not looked at. One night, the smell of steak was particularly potent. Chloe was in a celebratory mood, having secured a partnership with a company that sold meal prep kits. She propped her phone up against a wine bottle, the red light glowing. "Okay, guys, smile," she chirped, her voice suddenly animated, performance ready. She leaned into Mark, her hair falling perfectly over her shoulder. "Just having a perfect family dinner," she cooed at the tiny lens. "Quality time with the ones who matter most. It's so important to connect." She carefully angled the phone, a precise, practiced movement. I knew, without having to see the screen, that I was just outside the frame. I was a stray piece of furniture, easily cropped from the picture of their perfect life. Later that night, unable to sleep, I crept downstairs for a glass of water and saw Lily scrolling on her tablet. Chloe's video was there. The caption read, #family, first #blessed, #quality time. The comments poured in. "You guys are goals. Such a beautiful family." I wasn't in the picture, but I could feel the heat of its lie from across the room. The house began to feel smaller, the air thicker. I spent most of my time in the attic, the only space that was mine, though it offered little comfort. It was a repository for things the family no longer wanted, but hadn't bothered to throw away. Dusty boxes, an old rocking horse, and me. The single window looked out onto the neighbor's brick wall. The floorboards were bare and cold under my thin socks. There was no heat, and as autumn bled into a damp, bitter November, a permanent chill settled into my bones. I had taken to wearing my coat even when I was knitting, my fingers stiff and clumsy. It was on one of those cold afternoons that I heard Chloe's voice drifting up through the floorboards. The attic was directly above the living room, and a misplaced vent, cover near the wall, served as an unwitting conduit for their private conversations. She was on the phone, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "I just don't know how much longer I can take it, Trish," she was saying. A pause. "No, it's not one thing. It's everything. It's the whole house. It has that smell." My hands stilled, the knitting needles frozen in mid-stitch. "You know what I mean. The smell of old age. It's in the curtains, the carpets. I swear, I can smell it on my clothes. It's like she's slowly decaying and taking the house with her." Decaying. The word landed like a stone in my stomach. I wasn't a person to her. I was an infestation, a form of organic rot that was spoiling her pristine home. I sat there, wrapped in my coat in the freezing attic, long after the phone call ended. I didn't cry. The feeling was too cold, too deep for tears. It was a hollowing out. That night, when I opened my door to go down to the bathroom, I almost tripped on it. A can of air freshener. It wasn't a nice one, not the kind Chloe used in the rest of the house that smelled of lavender and vanilla. This was a cheap, generic brand, the can a garish green with a picture of a cartoon meadow on it. The scent was called Spring Rain, but when I tentatively pressed the nozzle, a chemical fog erupted, smelling of harsh, cloying sweetness. It was an assault on the senses. It had been placed directly in the center of the threshold, a deliberate offering. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. It was a warning. You stink. You are unclean. Erase yourself. I picked it up and placed it inside my room. The smell clung to everything, a constant, sickening reminder of her words. It was the smell of my own humiliation. My world had shrunk to the four walls of that attic. My only escape, the books I kept in sturdy boxes, stacked carefully against the wall. They were my real home. First editions I had hunted down in dusty shops, signed copies from authors I'd met during my 40 years as a librarian, poetry collections Robert had given me, their pages filled with his pencil-thin annotations. They were not just paper and ink. They were the catalog of my life, of my love, of my mind. They were the last part of me that felt whole. The final violation came on a Tuesday. I came up to the attic after my silent breakfast and froze in the doorway. The space was empty. The neat stacks of boxes were gone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I stumbled into the room, my hands searching the empty spaces where my books should have been. The dust outlines on the floor were like ghosts. I rushed downstairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Chloe was in the kitchen, tapping at her laptop, a mug of coffee at her elbow. "My books," I said, my voice a hoarse whisper I barely recognized. "Where are my books?" She looked up, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes before she smoothed it into a patient, placating smile. "Oh, that! Mom, I did you a favor." She gestured vaguely. "The attic was such a fire hazard. All that old paper. I decided it needed a real decluttering. You know, for a more minimalist aesthetic. Marie Kondo, you know?" She said it as if she were bestowing a great gift upon me. "But where are they?" I insisted, the panic rising in my throat. "We donated them," Mark said, walking into the room. He didn't even look at me, heading straight for the refrigerator. "To the library downtown. They'll go to a good home, people who will actually read them." The cruelty of that last line was breathtaking. The implication that I, a retired librarian, no longer read, that my life's passion was now just clutter. They spoke of it so casually, as if they'd tossed out a stack of old newspapers. They had taken my past, my 40-year collection of memories, and simply erased it. I wanted to scream, to rage, to tell them they had no right, that they had stolen a part of my soul. But my voice was gone, trapped behind a wall of shock and grief. I just stood there shaking while they went on with their mourning. For a week, I lived in a daze of quiet agony. Every creak of the empty attic floorboards was an echo of my loss. Then, one evening, Lily came to my door. She rarely sought me out. She held her tablet clutched to her chest, her face pale. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I have to show you something. But you can't tell Mom and Dad I did." She stepped into my room and held out the tablet. On the screen was a website I recognized instantly, eBay. And on that website was a seller account, Chloe's account. My blood ran cold. Lily's small finger scrolled down the screen, and there they were. My books, my life, listed one by one. There was the first edition copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that Robert had saved for months to buy me for our 10th anniversary. The listing photo was sharp, clinical. The description read, "Vintage first edition, good condition, from a local estate sale." Estate sale, as if I were already dead and buried. Lily kept scrolling. There was my leather-bound collection of Shakespeare's sonnets, the spine worn from my touch. The seller's note mentioned slight wear, adds to vintage charm. There was the children's book I had read to Mark 1,000 times, its cover illustration of a brave little mouse now staring out from Chloe's auction page. Each listing was a separate, twisting knife. She hadn't even bothered to hide it well. She was selling my history piece by piece to strangers for pocket money. Donated, they had said. A good home. The lie was so profound, so utterly contemptuous, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the screen, at the images of my soul being auctioned off for $20, $50, $100. Lily started to cry, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." I reached out and put a hand on her shoulder, the gesture automatic. But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at the screen, at the cold, hard evidence of what I had become to them. I was not a mother. I was an estate. And it was time for the liquidation to end. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. The grief, the humiliation, the slow, suffocating decay, it all compressed into a single diamond-hard point of clarity. The woman who loved those books was gone, erased by her own family, and in her place, someone new was beginning to form. The numbers on the screen weren't just numbers, they were a symphony. A celestial alignment that had, until this moment, only ever happened in other people's lives, in newspaper articles I'd glance at while waiting in line at the grocery store. 4, 15, 22, 38, 41, and the Powerball, a defiant 7. My number. Robert's, and my anniversary. The 7th of July. A tremor started in my hands, a vibration that had nothing to do with the cold seeping through the attic floorboards. It was the frantic, thrumming beat of a bird that has just realized the cage door is wide open. Freedom. The word bloomed in my mind, a sudden, vibrant flower in a desolate landscape. Not just freedom from the chilling drafts and the perpetual scent of dust and neglect, but freedom from the invisibility, freedom from being a ghost in my own son's home. My first coherent thought was a name. David Chen. A lawyer a friend from the library had used years ago for her estate planning. She'd called him a bulldog in a bespoke suit. That's what I needed. A bulldog. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling on the smooth, cold glass. It was an older model, a hand-me-down from Chloe after she'd upgraded. My thumb hovered over the search bar. And then, I froze. A different kind of cold, far more profound than the November air, washed over me. Mark's voice, from a family dinner a few months back, echoed in my head, laced with the smug pride of a man who believes he has conquered the world. "It's the best system on the market," he'd announced, gesturing vaguely at the small, blinking black box on the console in the living room, the router. "I can see every search, every text, every site visited on this network. Total parental control. It's about security. Keeps the family safe." He had looked at me when he said it, a quick, dismissive glance, as if I were part of the infrastructure, like the wiring or the plumbing. Safe. He'd used the word safe, but what I heard was contained. My phone was on their family plan. My old tablet, the one I used to read library ebooks, was connected to their Wi-Fi. Every digital breath I took was routed through his server, logged and filed away. I imagined him scrolling through the data logs, a king surveying his tiny, transparent kingdom. Mom searched for arthritis remedies again. Mom looked at pictures of hydrangeas. Mom tried to contact a lawyer. The phone in my hand suddenly felt like a tracker, a listening device. The open cage door had slammed shut, its bars now invisible but stronger than steel. I was in a digital cage and my own son was the warden. The elation of moments before curdled into a tight, metallic knot of fear in my stomach. $10 million was a shout, but I was trapped in a soundproof room. I couldn't make a call. I couldn't send an email. I couldn't even search for the number of a different lawyer without raising an immediate red flag. The blinking light on the router downstairs seemed to pulse in time with my frantic heartbeat, a single malevolent eye that saw everything. I was a prisoner, and the proof of my escape, the winning ticket tucked into my bra, was a secret I had to guard with my life, a secret I couldn't use. The walls of the attic, which had for so long felt like a slow, crushing press, now felt like the padded walls of a cell. My past mistakes paraded before me. The mistake of giving them all my money, the mistake of believing a verbal promise, the mistake of allowing myself to become so dependent, so enmeshed in their lives that I had no digital autonomy left. I had handed my son the keys to my prison and thanked him for it. The hope wasn't gone, but it was trapped in here with me, a frantic, fluttering thing, just as helpless as I was. If the digital world was a fortress, then I would have to escape through the physical one. The decision was made in the gray pre-dawn hours, after a night of staring at the water stains on the ceiling. The winning ticket, a warm, terrifying weight against my skin. Boston. I had to get to Boston. A payphone, a public computer at the library, something outside Mark's electronic panopticon. It was a simple plan, but it felt like plotting a breakout from a maximum security prison. I waited. I watched the rhythm of the house from my perch. Mark left for work at 7:15 a.m., sharp. Chloe would take Lily to school around 8 a.m., then usually go to a yoga class or meet a friend for coffee. That was my window. A precious 90-minute sliver of opportunity. I didn't dare take my tablet. I took only my worn purse, a few crumpled dollars I'd squirreled away from selling a knitted shawl, and the bus schedule I'd managed to snag on a rare trip to the pharmacy weeks ago. I dressed in my best coat, the camel-colored wool one Robert had bought me for our last anniversary. It felt like armor. I practiced my movements in my mind. Down the creaking attic stairs, a soft apology for each groan of the wood. Through the living room, past the family photos on the mantelpiece, photos from which I was conspicuously absent, to the front door. The house was quiet when I made my move. Lily was gone. Chloe's car was missing from the driveway. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the sounds of a sleeping beast. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and resolve. I reached the front door, my hand closing around the cold brass of the doorknob. I turned it. The latch clicked, the sound deafening in the silence. I pulled the door open, and the crisp, cold air of the outside world hit my face. Freedom was one step away. "Mom?" The voice came from behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Mark was standing at the entrance to the kitchen, his work bag slung over his shoulder. He wasn't supposed to be here. He never came home midday. His face was a mask of calm, paternal concern, but his eyes were hard, like gray stones. "Where are you going?" "Just for a walk," I stammered, my hand clutching my purse strap so tightly my knuckles were white. "To get some fresh air." "A walk?" He took a step closer, his gaze flicking down to my purse, then back to my face. "You're dressed for a trip, Mom, and the bus stop is in the other direction." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through me. How did he know? Had he seen me check the schedule? Was there a camera I didn't know about? I was just going to the corner store," I lied, my voice thin and reedy. Chloe appeared behind him, gliding into the hallway like a phantom. She wore her yoga pants and a concerned expression that didn't reach her eyes. It was a performance. They had planned this. "Honey, what's going on?" she asked Mark, but her eyes were locked on me. "I found Mom at the door. I think she was about to leave," Mark said, his tone low and serious, as if he were discussing a patient's unfortunate diagnosis. "Oh, sweetie," Chloe said, her voice dripping with pity as she approached me. She reached out to touch my arm, and I flinched away. "Are you feeling confused again? We talked about this. It's not safe for you to wander off." Confused. The word was a slap. They were twisting it, recasting my desperate bid for freedom as the rambling of a senile old woman. "I am not confused," I said, my voice shaking with a fury that was quickly being drowned by fear. "I know exactly what I am doing." "Mom, please," Mark said, his voice softening into a placating, condescending purr. "Just last week you couldn't remember where you put your glasses, and they were on your head. We're worried about you." It was a lie. A small, insignificant event twisted into a symptom of cognitive decline. I had been looking for my reading glasses, not my regular ones, but the details didn't matter. They were building their narrative, brick by insidious brick. "Maybe we should call Dr. Evans," Chloe suggested, looking at Mark. "He mentioned that it might be time to do some tests for dementia, just to get a baseline. It's for the best, for your own safety." Dementia. There it was, the word they'd been dancing around. They said it so casually, so reasonably, as if they were suggesting a checkup for a common cold. But it wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat. A diagnosis of dementia would be the final lock on my cage. It would give them power of attorney. It would give them control over my life, my decisions, and my money, my pension. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. The pension I had worked 40 years to earn. It was deposited into a joint account that Mark had insisted on setting up to help me manage my finances. I had thought it was kind. Now I saw it for what it was, the first step in a long, calculated campaign of financial appropriation. They weren't just neglecting me, they were actively plotting to strip me of everything I had left. They were trying to erase me, legally and financially, even before I was gone. "I am fine," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I felt the strength drain out of me, replaced by a chilling, profound sense of defeat. The world outside the door, which had seemed so close, was now a million miles away. Mark gently took my arm. "Come on, Mom. Let's get you back upstairs where it's warm. Chloe can make you a cup of tea." His touch was gentle, but it felt like the closing of a shackle. They led me away from the door, away from the crisp air of freedom, and back up the stairs to the cold, familiar silence of the attic. They had won this battle. They were not just my captors, they were the authors of my reality, and they were writing a story in which I was a confused, helpless old woman who needed to be protected from herself. And the most terrifying part was, as I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to their footsteps retreat down the stairs, a small, treacherous part of my mind began to wonder if they were right. The gaslighting was so complete, so absolute, that it was beginning to seep into the cracks of my own resolve. Defeated. That was the only word for it. I sat on the lumpy mattress, the camel-colored coat still on, a useless piece of armor. The air in the attic was stale with the smell of old wood, lost time, and my own profound hopelessness. The tea Chloe had brought up sat on the rickety nightstand, untouched and growing cold. A peace offering that was really a symbol of their victory. My world had shrunk to the 4 slanted walls of this room. The digital cage was impenetrable. And the physical cage was guarded by my own children, who were now painting me as a madwoman. Every avenue of escape was a dead end. The $10 million ticket felt like a cruel joke, a glimpse of a parallel universe I could never reach. I was a ghost with a winning lottery ticket. My gaze drifted around the room, cataloging the meager possessions that constituted my life. A stack of books, a knitting basket, a small collection of framed photos of Robert, and a much younger, happier me. And in the corner, covered by a dusty sheet, was the old, battered suitcase we had taken on our honeymoon to Niagara Falls. It was a hard-shell Samsonite, a deep 70s avocado green. We couldn't afford a new set, so we'd bought it from a second-hand store. It had been with us for every trip, every move. When I was forced to sell our house, it was one of the few large items I couldn't bear to part with. I don't know why I was drawn to it. Perhaps because it was a relic from a time when I was not invisible, when I was loved and seen. I pulled off the sheet, a small cloud of dust motes dancing in the weak light from the single window. I ran my hand over its textured plastic surface, my fingers tracing the outlines of old airline stickers. London, Paris, Rome. A lifetime of memories. I knelt and clicked open the 2 rusty latches. The lid creaked open, releasing a faint, familiar scent of mothballs and old paper. Inside, it was a time capsule. My wedding album. A bundle of Robert's letters tied with a faded ribbon. Lily's first baby shoes. I lifted them out, one by one, each object a small, sharp pang of nostalgia. My hand brushed against the fabric lining at the bottom. It was loose near the seam. I remembered Robert, a man for whom no detail was too small, meticulously regluing that very lining after a bottle of my perfume had broken inside on a trip to Maine. He was so careful, so thorough, always. Then, a thought, hazy at first, like something seen through fog. The money. The $400,000. My entire life savings. The proceeds from the sale of our home, the nest egg we had so carefully built. We gave it to Mark and Chloe for the down payment on this house. It was supposed to be an investment in our shared future, in my forever home. They had needed a document for the mortgage company. A gift letter, they'd called it, to prove the money wasn't a loan that had to be repaid, which would have affected their debt-to-income ratio. I remembered signing it in a hurry at their lawyer's office. Mark had been impatient, Chloe smiling her sweet, placid smile. It all seemed so straightforward. But then, another memory surfaced, pushing through the fog. A different day, a different document. It was a week later, just Robert and me at our own kitchen table. He had a piece of paper in front of him. It looked official. He was very serious. "Ava," he had said, his voice firm but gentle. "I love Mark. You know I do. But business is business, and family is complicated. I want you to sign this." I had trusted him completely. I would have signed anything he put in front of me. I scanned it, but the legalese was dense. I saw our names, Mark and Chloe's names, the amount of $400,000. He had pointed to a line near the bottom. "This is just a formality," he'd said. "A private agreement between us, a safety net. I had my lawyer draft it, and we'll get it notarized tomorrow." A safety net. I had forgotten. In the fog of grief after Robert passed, in the chaos of the move, in the slow, grinding process of becoming invisible, I had completely and utterly forgotten about it. They had called their paper a gift letter. But Robert's paper, it wasn't a gift letter. My heart began to beat faster. A slow, heavy thud. What had he called it? An agreement. That was it. A loan agreement. My fingers, now trembling with a new, frantic energy, tore at the loose lining inside the suitcase. It came away with a soft ripping sound, and there, underneath, was a compartment I had forgotten existed. And inside that compartment was a large manila envelope, sealed with wax, Robert's pretentious, lovely affectation, and a small, heavy, fireproof box. I lifted the box out. It was cool to the touch. The key was on my own keychain, a tiny, unassuming brass key I hadn't known the purpose of for the last 5 years. It had been with me this whole time. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, folded document. It was thick, creamy paper, the kind lawyers use to make things feel important. I unfolded it. At the top, in stark block letters, it read, "Promissory note and zero-interest loan agreement." It wasn't a gift. My eyes scanned the dense paragraphs of text, my mind struggling to catch up with the words. It detailed the principal amount of $400,000, the parties involved, the terms of a zero-interest loan payable upon the sale of the property. It was all there, clear as day, with my signature and Robert's at the bottom, alongside the embossed, circular stamp of a notary public. And then I saw it. The final clause, paragraph 7B, a section Robert must have insisted his lawyer add, a clause born of his meticulous, cautious love for me, his safety net. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words, each one landing like a hammer blow, shattering the walls of my prison. The full principal of $400,000 is immediately callable and due in full, with accrued interest calculated at the standard market rate from the date of origination, in the event of demonstrable familial neglect or abuse. Demonstrable familial neglect or abuse. He had known. Somehow, my cautious, meticulous Robert had foreseen a future I couldn't have imagined. He had looked into my son's heart and seen a potential for darkness that I, his mother, had refused to acknowledge. He hadn't just given me a safety net. He had forged me a sword. I sat back on my heels on the cold attic floor, the document clutched in my hand. The air was no longer stale. It was electric. The hopelessness that had been my constant companion for years began to recede, burned away by a cold, clarifying rage. They hadn't just taken my money. They had violated a legally binding contract. They hadn't just gaslit me. They had provided the very evidence I needed to invoke this clause. This document, hidden in the lining of an old suitcase, changed everything. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my voice. It was my power. It was Robert's final act of love, reaching across time to save me. I was not a confused old woman. I was a creditor. And the debt was about to come due. The cab's meter ticked over another dollar, a tiny, insignificant sound against the percussive drumming of the rain on the roof. Each drop that struck the glass beside my face was a judgment, a cold little punctuation mark at the end of the sentence my life had become. Mark's words were still echoing in the hollow space where my heart used to be. A burden. Just a burden. The door closing, the lock clicking shut, the sudden, shocking cold of the November storm. It wasn't just rain. It was a deluge, washing away the last vestiges of the woman I thought I was. A mother, a grandmother, a part of a family. I had given the driver the address of a small, discreet hotel near the Back Bay, a place I remembered from a lifetime ago, one of those establishments that prided itself on anonymity. A shelter was out of the question. I wasn't a charity case, not yet, not ever, if I could help it. In the worn fabric of my coat pocket, my fingers brushed against the thin, folded slip of paper. It felt like a live coal against my skin. $10 million. The number was so absurd, so fantastical, it felt like a cruel joke whispered by the universe. I had been sitting on that winning ticket for 3 days, waiting for the right moment to tell them, to share the miracle. I had imagined their faces, the shock, the joy. I had envisioned a new life for all of us, a life where the constant, grinding pressure of money would finally cease. Instead, I was cast out. And in that moment, huddled in the back of a rattling taxi, a different kind of vision began to form, one born not of generosity, but of the icy clarity that only profound betrayal can provide. My secret was no longer a gift to be shared. It was a shield, and it was about to become a sword. The hotel room was sterile, smelling faintly of bleach and air freshener. It was a world away from the attic's cloying scent of dust and neglect, the scent Chloe had so cruelly dubbed the smell of old age. I lay on top of the stiff, starched comforter, fully clothed, and stared at the textured ceiling. There were no water stains, no cobwebs. There was just a blank, indifferent white. For the first time in years, I was utterly alone. The silence was absolute. No footsteps from the floor below, no muffled arguments through the thin walls, no sound of Lily's video games. It should have been terrifying, this void. Instead, it felt like oxygen. Sleep didn't come. I simply lay there as the city's sounds bled through the window, the distant wail of a siren, the hiss of tires on wet pavement. My past played out behind my closed eyelids, not as a gentle stream of memories, but as a series of exhibits in a trial. Exhibit A, the deed to my home, signed over. Exhibit B, the bank statement showing the transfer of $400,000, my entire life savings. Exhibit C, a mental snapshot of the attic room, small and cold, my reward for a lifetime of love and sacrifice. Exhibit D, the plate of leftover macaroni while they ate steak. Exhibit E, Chloe's mocking smile in the Instagram video, my face deliberately, surgically cut from the frame. Exhibit F, the empty space on my bookshelf where my beloved first editions used to be. With each exhibit, the grief that had threatened to drown me began to recede, replaced by something harder, colder. It was like watching ice form on a winter lake, a slow, crystalline process, beautiful and deadly. By the time the first gray light of dawn filtered through the gap in the curtains, the woman who had been weeping in the rain was gone. In her place was someone else, someone I hadn't met in a very long time. I didn't need to pack. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a $10 million secret in my pocket. After a cup of burnt coffee in the hotel lobby, I walked out into the crisp morning air. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean, the sky a pale, fragile blue. I knew exactly where I was going. My feet carried me, with the certainty of a homing pigeon, toward Copley Square. The Boston Public Library rose before me, a palace of stone and knowledge, my sanctuary. For 40 years as a librarian, this world of ordered silence and infinite possibility had been my second home. Walking through its grand, echoing halls, past the marble lions and the soaring arches, was like stepping back into my own skin. The air smelled of old paper, binding glue, and floor polish, a scent that, to me, was the perfume of civilization itself. I bypassed the familiar reading rooms and headed for the public computer terminals. My fingers, which had grown clumsy from disuse, felt suddenly deft and sure on the keyboard. I didn't search for shelters or social services. I didn't look for articles on family reconciliation. My purpose was singular, precise. I opened the search engine, and my fingers typed the words, "Most ruthless asset protection lawyer in Massachusetts." The results flickered onto the screen. There were several names, several high-powered firms with glossy websites, but one name stood out: David Chen. The reviews were a litany of grudging respect from adversaries and effusive praise from clients. A shark. Relentless. He doesn't just fight for you, he builds a fortress. One review simply said, "If you are in the right, David Chen is a surgeon. If you are in the wrong, he is the plague." That was the man I needed. I scribbled his name and number on a slip of paper. I wouldn't use the library's phone or my own cell phone, which I suspected Mark monitored. He had become so paranoid about his online activities, so obsessed with control, that he had installed a comprehensive monitoring system on the home's Wi-Fi. A digital cage, he had once boasted, to keep the network secure. In reality, it was a cage for me. I found what I was looking for a few blocks away. A relic from a bygone era, a payphone. The receiver was cold and heavy in my hand, smelling of disinfectant and neglect. I fed the coins into the slot, my heart a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. I was no longer a victim being thrown away. I was a client making a call. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Law offices of David Chen." "I'd like to speak with Mr. Chen," I said. My own voice sounded strange to me, lower, steadier than it had been in years. "May I ask who is calling and the nature of your inquiry?" I took a breath. This was it. The first shot, fired in a war they didn't even know had been declared. "My name is Ava. I have a winning Powerball ticket for $10 million. I have a clear-cut case of financial elder abuse, and," I paused, letting the silence hang in the air, "I have a secret weapon." There was a moment of silence on the other end, then, "Please hold, ma'am. I'm putting you through." David Chen's office was not what I expected. It was on a high floor of a sleek glass and steel building in the financial district, but the interior was minimalist, almost Spartan. No mahogany desks or ostentatious displays of wealth, just clean lines, modern art, and a massive window that offered a panoramic view of the city and the harbor beyond. It was the office of a man who didn't need to project power because he simply possessed it. He stood up when I was shown in. He was younger than I'd pictured, perhaps in his early 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, but there was an intensity about him, a coiled energy that was palpable. He was, as the reviews had promised, a shark. But when he shook my hand, his grip was firm, and his expression was not of predatory greed, but of focused curiosity. "Ava," he said, his voice calm and direct. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Please have a seat. My assistant said you have a rather unique situation." I sat in the chair opposite his desk. It was made of black leather and cool steel. I felt the stiffness in my own spine match it. I didn't waste time with pleasantries or a long, tearful recounting of my woes. He was a surgeon, and a surgeon needs facts, not feelings. From my handbag, I retrieved 2 items and placed them side by side on the polished surface of his desk. The first was the lottery ticket, now carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. Its cheap paper and bright colors looked almost garish in the severe professional space. The second was a folded, yellowing document. It was the agreement Robert had insisted on when we gave Mark and Chloe the $400,000. I had found it exactly where I'd left it, tucked inside my copy of Moby Dick, in the box of books I had managed to hide in the back of my closet before Chloe's rampage, the one box she had missed. David Chen picked up the lottery ticket first, examining it under the bright desk lamp. He nodded slowly. "Validated, I assume?" "I called the lottery commission from the payphone yesterday," I confirmed. "It's real. The full $10 million prize." He set it down carefully, his expression unreadable. Then his eyes moved to the second document. He unfolded it with a lawyer's practiced care. His eyebrows shot up just slightly as he read. He was silent for a full minute, his gaze scanning the page, then scanning it again. The only sound was the faint whisper of the building's ventilation system. "This," he said finally, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the paper, "is not a gift agreement." "No," I said. "It's not. This is a zero-interest notarized loan agreement," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Payable in full upon the sale of the property at 127 Willow Creek Lane, or—" He paused, leaning in closer to read a specific clause. His eyes, which had been professionally curious, now lit up with a cold, predatory fire. I knew which clause he was reading. I recited it from memory, my voice a monotone. "Or demandable for immediate and full repayment, plus accrued interest at the maximum allowable state rate, retroactive to the date of signing, in the event of demonstrable familial neglect, abuse, or the failure to provide agreed-upon lifetime housing for the lender, Ava Valor." David Chen leaned back in his chair and looked at me. For the first time, a slow smile spread across his face. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing to behold. "Mrs. Valor," he said, the honorific now imbued with a newfound respect. "Your late husband was a very, very smart man." "He was a watchmaker," I said softly. "He believed in precision, and he didn't trust our son's wife." "He built a time bomb," Chen corrected, his voice electric with professional excitement. "And your son and daughter-in-law just handed you the detonator. The $400,000 is the principal. With the retroactive interest penalty, we're looking at a rough calculation." He tapped a few numbers into his calculator. "Approximately $780,000, give or take." He looked from the loan document to the lottery ticket, then back to me. "They threw you out." It wasn't a question. "Into a rainstorm, after I gave them every penny I had in the world so they could buy that house. They put me in an unheated attic and treated me like an unpaid servant. They sold my books. They called me a burden." My voice was flat, devoid of self-pity. It was a simple statement of fact. "And they don't know about this," he said, gesturing to the lottery ticket. "They know nothing." "Good," he said, his smile widening. "This is not just a case. This is a work of art." Our strategy session was not about justice in a courtroom. It was about architecture, financial architecture. We were not building a case. We were building a fortress and forging a weapon all in one. "First things first," David said, pacing in front of the window, a general surveying a battlefield. "We do not, under any circumstances, cash that ticket in your name. To the world, Ava Valor must cease to exist financially. You are a ghost. A destitute old woman cast out by her ungrateful son. That is the narrative. The moment your name is publicly associated with $10 million, you become the villain in their story. The crazy old mother who was hiding a fortune. It muddies the waters." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We create an entity," he said, his eyes gleaming, "an impenetrable blind trust. It will be the claimant of the lottery prize. It will be the legal entity that enforces the loan agreement. It will be a ghost, a phantom that Mark and Chloe can't see, can't fight, and can't trace back to you. You will be the sole, anonymous beneficiary, insulated behind layers of legal steel." He stopped pacing and looked at me. "The trust needs a name." I didn't have to think for a second. Robert had protected me, even from beyond the grave. His foresight, his quiet insistence on that one, crucial document, was the foundation of all of this. He had shown courage and valor when I had been too blinded by a mother's love to see the danger. "The Robert Valor Trust," I said. David Chen's smile returned. Perfect. Poetic. For the next few hours, he was a whirlwind of activity. He made calls, dictated memos, and drafted documents with a speed and precision that was dizzying. We set up the trust, a complex legal structure with him as the trustee, shielded by layers of corporate law. The lottery winnings would be claimed by this anonymous entity, disappearing into an account that bore no trace of my name. I was a phantom, a whisper, the invisible hand guiding the storm that was about to break. As I signed the final document, My hand was perfectly steady. I was no longer the trembling woman who flinched when Chloe raised her voice. I was the silent architect of a meticulous and righteous demolition. "Now what?" I asked, as he gathered the papers into a neat pile. "Now," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "comes the most difficult part of any campaign, the waiting." He explained the plan. Mark and Chloe, believing they were free of their burden, would be feeling euphoric. Their house in the ridiculously overheated real estate market of 2025 was a golden goose. They would be desperate to sell it, to cash in and upgrade their lives, to wash away the last physical reminder of me. "They'll list the house," David predicted. "They'll get an offer, probably over asking price, within a week. They'll be ecstatic. They will be celebrating on social media, planning their new life in a bigger, better home, free of any obligations. We let them. We let them get all the way to the closing table. We let them sign the papers, shake the hands, taste the victory." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "And then, at the 11th hour, just before the money changes hands, the Robert Valor Trust will strike. We file a lien against the property, a legal claim for $780,000. The sale will be frozen instantly. The buyers will panic. The bank will pull their financing. Their entire world will grind to a screeching halt. They will be trapped." A chill went down my spine, but it was not a chill of fear. It was the thrill of impending perfect justice. "Stay invisible, Ava," he warned as I prepared to leave. "Find a place to live, a temporary furnished apartment. Pay in cash. Don't use your credit cards. Don't contact anyone from your past. To Mark and Chloe, you have simply vanished. Let them believe you are huddled in a shelter somewhere, or worse. The more they underestimate you, the more complete their ruin will be." I walked out of his office and back into the anonymous flow of the city, but I was no longer drifting. I was moving with purpose. I found a small, furnished apartment in a part of the city I never frequented, a sterile one-bedroom unit with generic furniture and a view of a brick wall. It was perfect. It was a bunker. It was my command center. The days that followed blurred into a routine of quiet observation. I bought a cheap, untraceable laptop and a prepaid internet stick. I became a ghost in the machine, the digital world they love so much, now my hunting ground. I created a fake social media profile, a bland, middle-aged woman from Ohio named Brenda, and began to follow Chloe's circle of friends. It was all there, just as David had predicted. A week after I left, Chloe posted a picture. It was her and Mark, beaming, clinking champagne glasses on their front porch. The caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive triumph. "Here's to new chapters and fresh starts. So excited for what the future holds for our little family. Out with the old, in with the new. Blessed, new beginnings, positive vibes only." The for sale sign went up the next day. A slick, professional sign from a high-end real estate agency. Chloe posted a picture of that too. "Let the next adventure begin. Who wants to buy our beautiful home and make their own memories here? DM for details. Dream home, real estate, moving on up." The comments from her friends were a nauseating chorus of support. "So happy for you guys. You deserve it. Onwards and upwards." Not a single person asked where I was. It was as if I had never existed. I had been erased as easily as Chloe had cut me from that family dinner video. I watched, dispassionately, as the drama unfolded. There was a post about the open house, with pictures of a professionally staged home. My old furniture was gone, replaced by sleek, modern rentals. The attic was described in the listing as a charming bonus loft space, perfect for a home office or artist's studio. There was no mention of its lack of heating. Then came the post I was waiting for, a picture of the sold sticker plastered across the real estate sign. Mark and Chloe were kissing in front of it, Lily looking awkwardly at the camera beside them. "It's official!" Chloe's caption screamed in all caps. "We accepted an offer way over asking." "This market is insane. Can't believe we're saying goodbye to this place, but we are so ready for our next chapter. Thank you to everyone for your support on this journey. #sold, #dream life, #manifesting." I looked at the picture, at their triumphant, gloating faces. I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a profound, cold calm. They were so predictable. Their greed was a map, and I was simply following it to its inevitable conclusion. They thought they were cashing in on a house. They had no idea that they were the ones who had been sold. In my sterile apartment, surrounded by walls that held no memories, I closed the laptop. The waiting was almost over. The pieces were all in place. The Robert Valor Trust was silent, dormant, a leviathan waiting in the deep. David had all the paperwork ready. The lien was prepared, the legal notices drafted. All that was left was to choose the precise moment to strike. I thought of Robert, my quiet, gentle husband. He had never been a man for grand gestures or loud declarations. His love was in his actions, in the patient way he would fix a broken clock, in the foresight he had to protect me from a future he somehow saw more clearly than I did. This revenge, this silent, meticulous deconstruction of their world, felt like something he would have appreciated. It wasn't a scream of rage. It was the quiet, inexorable, and perfect ticking of a clock, counting down to zero, and their time was just about up. The world operates on a system of ledgers, debits, and credits. For months, for years, my account had been nothing but debits. My money, my home, my time, my dignity, all withdrawn by Mark and Chloe, leaving me with a balance so negative it had become an identity. But a system, no matter how rigged, has rules, and I had learned them. More importantly, I had found the one credit that could rebalance the entire system in an instant. $10 million was more than a credit, it was a reckoning. My new life began not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a hotel room air conditioner and the crisp, clean scent of professionally laundered sheets. While they were still living in the house built on my life savings, celebrating my departure, I was poring over financial documents with David Chen. While they were listing the house for sale, dreaming of a bigger, better life without me, I was orchestrating their downfall with the silent, meticulous precision of a librarian cataloging the end of an era, their era. They found a buyer almost immediately, a young family, eager and flush with cash from a tech startup. Mark and Chloe were ecstatic. I knew because Lily told me, her voice a whisper of guilt over a burner phone I'd bought for her. They'd already started packing the good things, leaving the rest. They were 3 days from closing, 3 days from cashing in on my life's work for a second time. 3 days from erasing me completely. It was a Tuesday morning. I imagined them waking up, the sun streaming into the master bedroom that should have been mine. I pictured Chloe scrolling through her phone, checking the likes on her latest post about their exciting new chapter. I saw Mark, smug and self-satisfied, drinking coffee from a mug that read "World's Best Dad." They would have felt untouchable, on the precipice of a victory they believed they had earned. That was when the first missile, launched weeks ago, hit its target. The call would have come from their real estate lawyer, a man named Bill. His voice, usually smooth and reassuring, would have been tight with panic. "Mark, Chloe, we have a problem, a very, very big problem." I can hear Mark's dismissive tone. "Bill, what is it? The buyers get cold feet. I can handle it." He always believed he could handle anything, a delusion born of a life where others had always paid his debts. "No, Mark, it's not the buyers. It's a lien. It was just filed against the property this morning." A lien. The word would have hung in the air, ugly and foreign. Chloe would have put her phone down, her brow furrowed. "A what? What does that mean? Is it from the IRS? Did you mess up the taxes, Mark?" The immediate turn to blame. It was their way. "No, it's not the IRS," Bill would have said, his voice strained. "It's from a private entity, a trust." "A trust?" Mark would scoff. "We don't owe anyone. This is a mistake. Just get it removed." "I can't just get it removed, Mark. This is a legally perfected lien. For a significant amount." "How significant?" Chloe's voice, sharp now. Annoyed, this was an inconvenience, a delay in her ascent to a better life. I imagined Bill taking a deep breath before he dropped the bomb. "The lien is for $780,000. Silence. Not the stunned, respectful silence of a library, but the dead, airless silence of a vacuum. I pictured them staring at each other, their confident expressions melting away like wax. 700… What? Mark's voice would have cracked. That's impossible. That's a joke. Who filed it? Who would do this? Bill's voice would be hesitant. The filing entity is the Robert Valor Trust. My husband's name, Robert, and Valor. It was a word I chose carefully. It means great courage in the face of danger, especially in battle. This was my battle. This was his legacy protecting me, one last time. The name would have meant nothing to them at first, just a string of words. Robert Valor. I've never heard of him, Mark would have snapped. This is fraud, Bill. Sue them. Do your job. It's not that simple, Mark. Bill's professional patience would be wearing thin. The lien references a notarized loan agreement, dated November 14th, 8 years ago. For the sum of $400,000, the color would have drained from their faces. The exact amount, the exact day I sold my life to give them theirs. They thought it was a gift, a sacrifice a mother makes. They didn't know Robert had insisted, his hand firm on mine as I signed the papers. Just in case, Ava, he'd said. A parent's love shouldn't be a blank check for disrespect. He saw a flicker of something in Mark, even then. I had dismissed it as overcautiousness. He saw it as a prophecy. That was a gift, Chloe would have shrieked into the phone. She gave us that money. There was no loan. Well, the Robert Valor Trust has a document that says otherwise, Bill would have retorted. A contract you signed, Mark. It specifies it was an interest-free loan, but it also contains a clause, a very unusual clause. What clause? Mark's voice, now just a choked whisper. It states the loan becomes due in full immediately, with punitive interest calculated for the entire term, in the event of, and I'm quoting here, verifiable evidence of familial neglect or abuse. That was David Chen's masterpiece, the legal interpretation of that clause. He had argued, and the court had accepted, that my life in that unheated attic, my role as an unpaid servant, the emotional cruelty, the theft of my property, it all constituted a pattern of verifiable neglect. The interest, legally compounded, came to $380,000. Added to the principal, it was $780,000. It was every last cent of equity they had in the house. The sale wasn't just frozen. Their entire net worth had just been vaporized. They were trapped in a house they couldn't sell, by a debt they couldn't pay, to a ghost they couldn't comprehend. That was the first missile. The second and third were already in the air, designed to strike simultaneously, to create a cascade of failure from which there was no recovery. While they were still reeling from the financial blow, Mark's cell phone would have buzzed. A call from his office. His boss, a man named Stephen, who valued productivity and corporate loyalty above all else. Mark, still dazed, would have answered. Mark, can you come down to my office? Now. Stephen's voice would be ice. Stephen, I'm dealing with a family emergency. Can it wait? No, Mark, it cannot. I imagined his drive to the office, his mind racing. He'd still be thinking about the lien, trying to figure out who Robert Valor was. He wouldn't have the slightest inkling that his problems were about to multiply exponentially. He'd walk into Stephen's office to find the head of HR sitting there, a grim-faced woman with a file folder open on her lap. Mark, have a seat, Stephen would say, not meeting his eye. We've received a report, an anonymous one, but it's incredibly detailed. A report about what? The HR woman would slide a printed-out spreadsheet across the table. It was a log. Dates, times, server IP addresses, data usage spikes, all corresponding to the company's off-peak hours. It was a meticulous record of his crypto mining operation. The operation he ran on the company's dime, using their powerful servers, costing them thousands in electricity and processing power. It was the log I had kept. Every night, when they thought I was sleeping in my cold attic room, I would hear the faint, high-pitched whine of his computer's fans working overtime. I learned to check the home network's data usage from the library computer. I cross-referenced the times with his work schedule. I had built the case against him, piece by piece, in a small, worn notebook. David Chen's firm had simply typed it up and sent it from a secure, untraceable email address. This is a misunderstanding, Mark would stammer, the blood draining from his face. Is it, Mark? Stephen would say, his voice lethal. Because our IT department spent the last 2 hours verifying it. The logs are real. You've been stealing company resources for months. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation and likely termination. Please hand over your company laptop and keycard. Security will escort you out. The walk of shame. I savored the thought of it. The man who called me a gan-nang, a burden, being publicly exposed as a common thief. The man who prided himself on his career, his status, reduced to a pariah being walked out of his own office. He would have stumbled out into the parking lot, his world spinning. He would call Chloe, his voice a frantic mess. But Chloe wouldn't answer, because at that exact moment her own world was evaporating. Her phone would be buzzing, not with the gentle chime of a like, but with the frantic, ceaseless vibration of a system overload. Her influencer career, her carefully constructed facade of perfect motherhood and curated domestic bliss, was being systematically dismantled. An anonymous account had appeared on Instagram. Its handle was @AvasLibrary. Its profile picture was the cover of a first edition Hemingway, one of the books she had stolen from me. The account's first post was a screenshot of Chloe's eBay page showing my beloved donated books listed for sale. The caption was simple: a perfect family dinner or a perfect crime. Swipe to see. The next slide was the video she had posted, the one where she cropped me out, followed by a photo of the cheap, microwaved meal she had given me that same night. The account then tagged every single one of her followers, every brand she had ever worked with, every mommy blogger in her network. And then came the hashtag, simple. Devastating. Hashtag Chloe the Thief. Within minutes, it was a firestorm. Comments flooded her posts. Is this true? Did you really steal from your own mother-in-law? I can't believe I ever looked up to you. You're disgusting. Hashtag Chloe the Thief. Unfollowed. Blocked. Reported. Her phone would be a relentless torrent of hate. Notifications from her brand partners would start to ping in. Terse, corporate emails. Dear Chloe, in light of recent information, we are terminating our partnership agreement, effective immediately. Our brand cannot be associated with these allegations. Please remove all sponsored content featuring our products by the end of the day. Her carefully built digital kingdom, her source of income and validation, was turning to ash in her hands. She would see her follower count plummeting, the numbers dropping in real time like a morbid countdown. She would try to delete the comments, to block the account, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with a sieve. For every comment she deleted, 100 more appeared. The hashtag was trending. People were sharing it, reposting the screenshots. It was out of her control. It had gone viral. That's when Mark's frantic call would have finally broken through. She would answer, her voice trembling. What is happening? She would sob. My account, my career, it's gone. Someone is trying to destroy me. They're destroying us, Chloe. Mark's voice would be hollow, defeated. I've been suspended. They knew about the crypto. And the house. Chloe, we're going to lose the house. The pieces would finally click into place in their minds. This wasn't a series of unfortunate events. This was a coordinated attack, precise, ruthless, all-encompassing, and there was only one person who could possibly know all their secrets. One person they had wronged so deeply that such a cold, calculated revenge was conceivable. Me, the meek, invisible old woman they had cast out into the rain. Their panic would turn to a desperate, frantic search. They tried my old cell phone number first. A recorded message was all they got. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. Then they would jump in the car, peeling out of the driveway of the house that was now their prison. Their first stop would be my sister's house. I had already called her, of course. I hadn't told her everything, just that I was safe and needed some time. I asked her not to tell Mark or Chloe where I was, no matter what they said. I can see Chloe, her face streaked with mascara, banging on my sister's door. Aunt Carol, please, we need to find Mom. It's an emergency. My sister, a woman of quiet strength, would open the door just a crack. I'm sorry, Chloe. I haven't heard from her. Her face a mask of polite indifference. "You're lying," Mark would shout, his voice raw. "She's behind this. We know she is. We need to talk to her." "I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property," Carol would say, her voice firm, and she would gently close the door in their faces. They would try my old friends next, the ones from my book club, the neighbors from my old house. Each stop would be a new dead end, a closed door, a polite but firm, "I'm sorry, I don't know where she is." I had vanished, not like a wisp of smoke, but like a foundation that had been ripped out from under a building. I was gone, and in my place was only the wreckage of their lives. Defeated, they would drive back to the house they couldn't sell, the house filled with boxes they couldn't unpack, the air thick with the stench of their failure. They were surrounded by the symbols of a perfect life that was now publicly exposed as a fragile, pathetic lie. They had no money, no jobs, no reputation. All they had was a crushing debt to a trust named after a man they had disrespected on behalf of a woman they had erased. They would sit there, in the silence of that house, the setting sun casting long shadows across their pale, shocked faces. And in that silence, they would finally understand. They hadn't just pushed an old woman out of their home. They had pushed her into a position of absolute power. They had made her invisible, and in that invisibility, she had become invincible. The Gangnam had become the architect of their ruin. The game was over. I had not just rebalanced the ledger. I had burned it. The air in my new home smells of sea salt and clean linen. It's a scent I chose, a quiet declaration that this space is mine alone. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, the Boston Harbor is a living tapestry of blues and grays, dotted with the white sails of boats that move with a freedom I am only just beginning to understand. There are no cramped corners here, no lingering odor of cheap floral air freshener trying to mask a resentment so thick you could taste it. There is only silence, a vast and luxurious quiet that hums with the distant life of the city below. I spend hours in the armchair by the window, a book resting unread in my lap, simply watching the tide come in and go out. It's a rhythm that soothes the raw, frayed edges of my past. I sometimes trace the outline of the city skyline with my finger against the cool glass, feeling a strange and peaceful sense of ownership, not of the city, but of my place in it. I am no longer a ghost in someone else's house, an unwanted piece of furniture to be draped with laundry or shoved into a corner. I am the occupant, the sole resident. My thoughts rarely drift to Mark and Chloe anymore. When they do, it's not with the fiery rage or the cold bitterness that once fueled me. It's with a detached, clinical sort of finality. Hate is a fire that consumes the vessel that holds it, and I have no more of myself to burn. I see it now as my lawyer, Mr. Chen, first framed it for me in his stark, minimalist office. He called it a strategic removal of a non-performing asset. I prefer to think of it as surgery. I was a body plagued by a creeping, malignant growth. For years, I allowed it to fester, telling myself it was a part of me, a familial bond that couldn't be severed. But it was a sickness, one that was slowly draining the life from me, dimming my light until I was barely a flicker. What I did wasn't an act of vengeance. It was an act of survival. A surgeon doesn't hate the tumor. They excise it with precision to save the patient. And I was, finally, my own patient. I cut them out. All of them. And in their place there is only this clean, quiet, healing space. The soft, melodic chime of my tablet is the only sound that regularly punctuates the quiet. It's a sound I've come to associate with a complicated mixture of sorrow and hope. On the screen, Lily's face appears. She's in her dorm room, the background a typical collage of posters and textbooks. She looks older than she did just a few months ago, the youthful softness around her eyes replaced by a weary sort of determination. "Hi, Grandma," she says, her voice small. "Hello, Lily," I reply, my own voice even. I don't smile, not yet. This is our ritual. She takes a deep breath, the kind you take before plunging into cold water. "I had my session with Dr. Anya today," she begins. "We talked about enablement, about how my silence wasn't neutral. It was a choice, a vote for them, and against you." I simply listen, my hands resting in my lap. I watch her as she wrestles with the words, her gaze dropping to her own hands, then forcing itself back up to meet mine on the screen. I was a coward, Grandma. There's no other word for it. I saw how they treated you. I saw Dad ignore you when you spoke. Saw Chloe roll her eyes when you cooked for us. I knew the attic was cold. I knew they were selling your books. I knew, and I did nothing. I was so scared of their anger, so terrified of them turning on me, that I let them erase you. And I stood by and helped them do it by not saying a word. Tears well in her eyes, and this time she lets them fall. In our first few calls, she would wipe them away furiously, as if ashamed. Now, she lets them trace paths down her cheeks, an admission of her grief. "I'm so sorry," she whispers, the words cracking. "I don't expect you to forgive me. Doctor, Anya says I can't ask for that. Forgiveness is a gift, not a demand. I need you to know that I see it. I see it all now, and I hate myself for it." I let the silence sit between us for a long moment, letting her words hang in the air. I see the daughter of my son, but I also see something else stirring within her, the resilience of her grandfather, Robert, a flicker of his integrity. "Hating yourself is as useless as hating them, Lily," I say finally, my voice soft but firm. "It's another fire that will only burn you. The past is made of stone. You can't change it. You can only decide what you build with those stones from this day forward." She nods, sniffling. "I'm working. At the campus library. I'm paying for my own tuition. I sold the car Dad bought me. I'm taking the bus. I want to earn my life, not have it handed to me." "That's a start," I acknowledge. I don't shower her with praise. That's not what she needs. She needs the quiet, steady validation of a path chosen, not a destination reached. I am not offering her absolution. I am offering her a compass. It is up to her to make the journey. You are the only part of that life I chose to salvage, Lily. Do not make me regret it. A tearful, fragile smile touches her lips for the first time. "I won't, Grandma. I promise." We talk for a little while longer, about her classes, about a professor she admires, about the surprisingly good pizza at the campus diner. We talk about small things, the mundane bricks you use to rebuild a life. When we hang up, the penthouse is quiet once more, but the silence feels different. It holds a single, thin, tenacious thread of connection to a future I hadn't thought possible. I never heard from them again directly. Mr. Chen gave me one final curt update weeks after the sale of the house collapsed. The lien from the Robert Valor Trust had been the final straw. Their carefully constructed world of social media perfection and leveraged finances crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. Mark lost his job, his reputation destroyed by the anonymous, evidence-backed report of his misuse of company resources. Chloe's influencer career evaporated overnight. The screenshots of her eBay account selling my precious first editions were her digital epitaph, forwarded to every brand partner and follower she had. They were left with nothing but their shared bitterness and a mountain of debt. According to Mr. Chen, they tried to contact me. Desperate calls, emails filled first with rage, then with hollow apologies, and finally with pitiful pleas. They were all routed into a digital black hole, never to reach me. They were shouting into a void of my own creation. My vengeance was never going to be a screaming match across a courtroom. It was not a tearful confrontation or a dramatic monologue. My ultimate statement was my absence. My power was my silence. I simply left. I removed myself from their narrative, and in doing so, became the author of my own. I left them with the deafening echo of their own choices, stripped of the status they worshipped and the mother they discarded. As evening descends, the city begins to glitter. The lights come on one by one across the harbor, tiny stars reflected in the dark water. I stand at my window, watching the world I've built for myself illuminate. I understand now. It was never about the $10 million. That was just the key, the tool that unlocked the cage. The real prize wasn't the money. It was the reclamation, reclaiming my name from their whispers of burden, reclaiming my story from their carefully curated lies, reclaiming my very existence from the invisibility they had tried to shroud me in. They tried to turn me into a ghost, a forgotten footnote in their perfect life. They forgot that some ghosts don't fade away, they learn to haunt. And some, if they are pushed far enough, learn how to become legends,